All right. In this video, I'm going to go over what happens in the preface of the Groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals, and mainly what I'm going to try to explain is some of the background in epistemology and metaphysics that informs what Kant's doing. So let's start with those two terms. We have epistemology and metaphysics. Epistemology comes from the Greek word episteme and the Greek word logos. Logos means a lot of things. It can mean like the discourse, it can mean reasoning. It can also mean study of. So that's why you find words like biology and psychology, anthropology ending the way they do. Biology is the study of life. Psychology is the study of the mind. Anthropology is the study of human beings. So epistemology is the study of knowledge, but of a particular kind of knowledge, of scientific knowledge. So, but over time, it's come to just mean the study of knowledge in general. So the Greek word episteme meant like scientific knowledge, but we've come to use the word to study anything about knowledge, knowledge itself, rather than the particular things you might have knowledge of. Right? So like when you know a lot of biology, you have a lot of knowledge of and about living things. Epistemology doesn't study living things, though. It studies knowledge. And so epistemological issues are issues about the nature of knowledge, what it is to know something, how you come to know anything, right? As opposed to how you come to know particular things. So you might be familiar with various academic disciplines having their own methods class. Like here are the ways in this discipline we go about finding out about things. So historians will have a historiography class. Various scientific disciplines will have quantitative, qualitative methods classes, things like that. Epistemology is the study of more general issues related to the nature of knowledge. Metaphysics is a little harder to explain, and maybe by way of explaining why it's tougher to explain what metaphysics is and epistemology is that no one seriously questions whether epistemology is an important thing to think about. Pretty much everybody agrees we have to think long and hard about what's involved in knowledge, what makes something count as good evidence or not, what makes something count as a good explanation or not, good reason to believe something or not. Lots of people, however, over time, especially over the last 200 years, have come to the conclusion that metaphysics is just nonsense. Now, you might think you know what metaphysics is if you've been to a bookstore like Barnes and Noble and gone to their metaphysics section where you find all sorts of stuff about interpreting your dreams or what your spirit animal is or, previous lives. And these are basically all ideas borrowed from other cultures that people have not taken very seriously, or they've tried to understand without understanding the rest of the stuff in that culture, spirit animals like that, right? So this is apparently a concept from various Native American religions that a bunch of non-Native Americans just took and they tried to do stuff with when they didn't understand the context of the idea. Previous lives, right? There's lots of religions that believe in reincarnation, interpreting dreams. It's just made up stuff, right? When philosophers talk about metaphysics, they're not talking about any of that. Nothing about, if you'd take a metaphysics class in a university, you're not going to hear anything about previous lives. You're not, you might hear that a little bit with Plato, but that's it. And it won't be like a serious matter for discussion. You won't hear anything about interpreting dreams or anything like that. It's got nothing to do with metaphysics. The term metaphysics just comes from the name of a book of Aristotle's called the Metaphysics, which just meant the after the physics. It's the book that came after his book, The Physics. And it studied, or it was about topics that were in a sense more fundamental than the topics covered in his book, The Physics. So physics was one of the, by Aristotle, his book called Physics, was one of the first books on natural science. Metaphysics studies the objects and the forces and the facts that are supposed to be more fundamental even than natural science. And so whereas physics, for example, will study matter and energy, two different kinds of things that exist, metaphysics is going to not study those things so much. It might study them a little bit, but not much. Physics does a pretty good job of studying matter and energy. Metaphysics will talk about what things exist. When physicists study change, they might talk about, change in size, change in momentum, things like that. Metaphysicists or metaphysicians will study change itself. What is change most fundamentally? So metaphysics is, in a sense, a more abstract and fundamental study of the world than physics. But it's also a study of the world that lots of people are like, I don't think it actually gets more fundamental or abstract than physics. So there's a lot of people who think, mostly just bunk, mostly nonsense. But here's what you can say, and this is definitely going to be true of Kant. Kant's going to say metaphysics is a study of the most fundamental categories of existence. And I'm not going to say of the natural world, because one of the questions that arises in metaphysics is, are there things that exist that aren't part of the natural world? So this is another way in which you can distinguish metaphysics from physics. Physics is only going to study things in the natural world. It's only going to study things that can be observed, or things that, even if they can't themselves be observed, have an impact on things that can be observed. So there's plenty of things physicists study that we can't directly observe in any way. Physicists study the singularities at the center of black holes. You can't observe a singularity, but you can observe the effects it has on things that are observable. Metaphysics will study things that can't be observed and can't impact this world. Right? So there are metaphysicists or metaphysicians. I've never been clear myself on which word you should use or why. But there's lots of people who do metaphysics who will study questions about other universes, completely disconnected from our own. Whereas a physicist is not going to study that. Physicists can study other universes. There are theories in physics that say there are other universes, but those universes are not completely disconnected from our own. For example, if you know the Everett interpretation of quantum mechanics, that's a view on which different universes diverge over time. But physics fundamentally studies the natural world and things that can impact the natural world. Okay. So that's epistemology and that's metaphysics. Kant initially became an intellectual celebrity for his work on epistemology and metaphysics. And I will not be able to do justice to what he has to say on those topics, but I will explain a little bit about what he's bringing to his moral theory from those topics. All right, so Kant opens up the preface saying that the ancient Greeks divided all of philosophy into three areas. Physics, ethics, and logic. If you're using the early modern texts translation, they change physics to natural science. It's an appropriate change. It gets closer to what we nowadays mean by physics, where physics is just a part of natural science. But in Kant's day, physics would have really covered everything. The disciplines of biology and chemistry and things like that didn't really exist on their own yet. Physics definitely did. And what Kant says is, logic is a formal discipline, whereas ethics and physics are material disciplines. But ethics and physics each have a material part and a formal part. So overall, they're material, but they each have a formal part, whereas logic only has a formal part. Okay, so what is this material-formal distinction? Kant says material disciplines are concerned with certain objects, and formal disciplines aren't. What does that mean? Well, to give you a sense of what it means, I'll give you a little taste of logic by showing you a logical rule. Now, the logical rule I'm about to show you is one that I'm not sure Kant himself would have recognized. Kant had very old-fashioned ideas about logic, but that doesn't matter because this makes the point well enough. All right, what we have here is a logical rule in green called disjunctive syllogism. What the disjunctive syllogism rule says is that if you already know two propositions, like 1 and 2, you are always entitled to infer the third proposition. All right, so what are 1 and 2? I mean, this is x, v, y, quarter of a box, x, and then y again. The idea here is x and y stand for other propositions. So you could, if you wanted to substitute in various propositions for x, you could say x equals it is raining, and y is it is sunny. Okay, so then one would say it is raining or it is sunny. Two would say it is not raining. So the lowercase v there stands for or. The quarter of a box stands for, or I suppose half a box it could be, stands for not. So if you have two propositions, it is raining or it is sunny, and it is not raining, then you get to conclude that it is sunny. Now, the point here, the reason to put it in terms of x or y rather than it is raining or it is sunny, is that this rule works no matter what x and y are. Pick anything you want for x and y, and this rule will work. Now, here's what that does not mean. It does not mean that no matter what you pick for x and y, 1 and 2 will be true. There are things you could pick for x or y where the first proposition, x or y, just isn't true. If I say it is raining or it is cloudy, that isn't true. Why? Because, well, they can both be false, right? It could both not be raining and not be cloudy. You can have a perfectly clear sunny day. So it's not that 1 and 2 will be true no matter what you pick. It's that no matter what you pick x and y to stand for, if 1 and 2 are true, then y is true. Or in other words, this rule holds no matter what you're talking about. And what you're talking about is the object of your thought. So when Kant says logic is formal, he's just saying logic is discovering rules that work no matter what it is that you're thinking about. It discovers rules like this, even if Kant himself might not have recognized disjunctive syllogism as a rule, I'm not sure. The logical system of which this rule is a part with these symbols in it hadn't been developed by the time Kant was alive. So that's the only reason I express any skepticism. So logic works and logical principles work independent of anything you're thinking about. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. And really, when you're doing logic, you don't ever have to be talking about anything. Once you learn the system, you can do proof after proof after proof of logic and never say anything about what any of the variables stand for. Logic doesn't require you to think about any particular objects. What he's saying about physics and ethics, or natural science and ethics, is that both of them do. In order to do physics and in order to do ethics, you do at some point have to talk about particular things. They're supposed to give you answers about particular questions. So if you have a physics question, right, if you want to know how much force will be generated by this car moving at this speed, right, you are asking a question that has a particular answer. You're asking a question about particular things at particular times, engaged in particular processes or actions. And even at its most abstract, physics does seem to concern, or it seems like it concerns, particular objects. Now, maybe it's true that you can get laws of physics that hold for every object whatsoever, and that's what Kant is getting at with the formal, whoops, didn't mean to be erasing, with the idea that there's a formal aspect to physics. But what is true is that overall, physics and ethics both have objects that they're about, whereas logic does not. But he says they each have formal parts. The formal part of physics is just metaphysics. Whereas the material part is what we ordinarily think of as the natural sciences. The material part of ethics, Kant sometimes refers to as anthropology. The formal part of ethics is what he sometimes calls the metaphysics of morals. This book is a groundwork of the metaphysics of morals. He's trying to lay out the basic principles of the formal part of ethics. Now, saying that it's formal means it doesn't concern any particular object. Another way of putting that is that it holds for any object whatsoever. Right? So like logical rules like disjunctive syllogism, which I'm about to erase here because I'm running low on room, formal rules like disjunctive syllogism hold no matter what variable you put in the place of x and y. Similarly, the formal part of ethics will discover ethical rules that hold independent of anything, right? Like no matter what you pick to be what you're talking about. Oops. The formal part of ethics, the principles discovered in the formal part of ethics, will remain true for that case. So no matter what ethical situation you're in, no matter who's involved, no matter what they're doing, the formal part of ethics will discover rules that hold for that situation, for those people in that case. That's what this book is about. It's not a complete metaphysics of morals, but it is the beginning part of the metaphysics of morals. The rest of it, the rest of ethics, will come from anthropology, which Kant says will provide us with particular knowledge about human beings, because we study ethics in order to find rules that apply to us. And what Kant will say is, here's what you do. You start with the formal part. You start with the principles that hold no matter what. And then you build in facts about human beings after. He makes a big deal throughout the book of saying that what he's trying to do in the groundwork of the metaphysics of morals is discover rules that hold for all rational beings, not just for human beings. Now, if someone in the Middle Ages had said this, the reasonable thing to conclude would be, oh, they're talking about angels. They want to know which rules apply to angels and not just human beings. I don't know if Kant ever believed in angels, but here's what's definitely true. Kant believed in aliens. Kant was sure there were aliens. And he thought the farther you got away from Earth, the smarter the aliens got, which seemed to suggest that we were like the dumbest creatures in the universe. Or like Earth had the dumbest creatures in the universe. We're the smartest creatures on Earth. But that's the goal of this book. And I'm going to say a little bit more about how this sets Kant apart almost immediately from Aristotle and what implications it has for the kind of investigation he's going to engage in going forward.